To really understand why this feat was so insane, we must first understand why no one has ever done it before. The US Open is a part of a larger group of championships called the Grand Slam tournaments. This includes the US Open itself, the Australian Open, the French Open, as well as Wimbledon, all which are hosted at different times of the year. These tournaments are also what is referred to as the peak of professional tennis. They offer the highest prize money as well as the most ranking points for men and women. In tennis, a player's ranking is based on the total points that they accrue over the last 20 tournaments. In other words, being number one in tennis is about having the most points from the Women's Tennis Association for women and the Association of Tennis Professionals for men. The amount of points you have decides your rank, which decides on the tournaments that you can play at, as well as how much money you can ultimately make. Most pros start at small tournaments called futures tournaments. Future tournaments are really the lowest level of professional tennis tournaments. They offer very low prize money and minimal points. You earn less than 25 points for winning the whole thing, and the most prize money you can earn is roughly $25,000. Players who play in these are usually ranked 600 to 700 in the world and some in the thousands. Future tournaments are really hosted at local courts, just with a chair for the umpire. Players themselves even clean the courts between changeovers on clay. There's also no ball boys or girls like you would see on television. In 2022, KP Panu, who was ranked 664 at the time, spent $34,500 on travel. He earned roughly $6,771 in prize money from the tournaments that year. In one tournament, he even asked the question, "Why am I here playing literally for $6?" after losing in the early rounds of the futures tournament. This is where players first had to start their grind to the top of the tennis ladder and what makes professional tennis so hard. Once players accumulate enough ranking points, they can play at larger challenger events. These are usually reserved for those between the top 100 and 500 in the world. You still receive a tiny amount of money or points compared to the main tours, but you get significantly more compared to futures events. Players also tend to spend years playing at these challenger events too. The competition at these events are also extremely high, as many players want to break out and reach the top of the tour events. This is the WTA events for women as well as the ATP events for men. The former number 3 player in the world, Jessica Pegula, played at the challenger events for years before making it to the WTA events.
What was it like to be Jessica Pegula on the challenger tour?
I honestly think it's harder on the challengers tour than when you actually get to the level here. Not that this still isn't hard, but to a certain extent, it's like when you're on the Challenger Tour, everyone just wants to win so freaking bad and they're trying to get out of there.
She highlights this grueling experience, saying that on the Challenger Tour, everyone wants to win so bad. They're just trying to get out of here, there's bad courts, the umpires suck, and you're getting bad calls. Basically, the futures and Challenger events do not pay very much, there isn't a ton of prestige, but if you can grind it out, maybe you can eventually make it to the main events. Pegula turned professional in 2009, and it took her 10 years to reach the WTA tours after grinding on the futures and challenger events. This eventually gave her access to high-paying WTA events, including the WTA 1000, 500, and 250, and this also included the Grand Slam tournaments. And you can think about the challenger as well as the future events as a minor league of professional tennis, and the Grand Slam and the WTA events as the majors. And the Grand Slams is really where players start making real money in tennis. In 2024, even if you lost in the first round, you would still take home roughly $100,000, much more compared to many futures and challenger events. But only the top 104 players who signed up for the tournament are guaranteed a spot in the main draws of the Grand Slam tournaments. And only 9 spots are given to wildcards like Emma Raducanu. At the beginning of 2021, Emma Raducanu only had a ranking at 345 with 149 ranking points. She managed to work her way up and made it to a ranking of 150 with a total of 531 ranking points. But this was still not enough to get to the main draws of the tournament. This meant that she had to compete in the qualifiers to get to the main tournament of the US Open in August. This gave her a major disadvantage because this meant that she needed to win 3 matches in a row to get to the main events. In fact, if you had a 50% chance of winning each match, you would have a 12.5% chance of making it past the qualifier and only a 0.1% of winning the actual US Open itself. And if you really want to think about it, your odds are basically 1 out of 1,000. But Emma was able to do this way above what you would expect from luck. The US Open for women is played in a best of 3 sets format. Players must win 6 games to win a set. If players reach 5-5, it's the first to reach 7. In the event of a score of 6-6, a tiebreaker to 9 points wins the set. Raducanu, she specialized in hard courts that were used at the US Open. She did statistically better at hard courts compared to any other type such as grass or clay. increasing her odds basically at the US Open. In 2018, she won 85% of her matches on hard courts, 78% in 2019, but she did not play much in 2020. When we average these two rates, we see a win rate of 82% on hard surfaces, rivaling some of the top players in the league. And this meant that her chances of winning 10 matches in a row like she did at the US Open is actually around 13%. Although this is still not a great odd, it's still significant compared to the 0.1% had it been luck alone. In addition to this, Raducanu was simply a great player. Let's take a look at her rise, and you can see that she had some major wins even before entering the US Open. Hence, she was already able to make it near the top 100 even before her historic win. Furthermore, tennis is also a really interesting sport when it comes to luck versus skill, since it relies on much less luck compared to other sports. According to the book The Success Equation by Michael Mauboussin, he expands on the luck's role in many sporting outcomes. Mauboussin provides the following equation: skill equals observed outcome minus luck. Subtracting the luck component from the observed outcome gives a better measure of someone's skill. If you rank some of the world's most popular sports, tennis is one of those games where the best player tends to always win, the majority of time relative to other games. I can go over this formula a little bit more in future videos, but for the purpose of this video, tennis is largely based on skills compared to other sports like basketball, hockey, or football. This is because in tennis, a ball is served a large number of times, and a slight advantage in skill gives an overall advantage to the better player. In the women's game, where it's a best of 3 sets, players can hit in excess of 300 shots during the match. As a result, the ranking in tennis tends to persist for years. For example, a player like Novak Djokovic was able to hold the #1 spot for 8 years, Federer for 5, and Serena for 3. It's also really important to realize that whenever someone is at the top of the tennis ranking, a slight edge can make or break your career. For example, in the book Game Set Match, it mentions that players with a 53% chance of winning each point has an 85% chance of winning the match. This again is because the ball is in play so many times that a slight edge can win you the match. And I say this because after her performance in 2021, Emma struggled for the next few years. She really never reclaimed her spot in the top 10 after August of 2022. However, her injuries are a huge factor. Like I said earlier, elite tennis players are very close in skills to each other. A minor injury or age can be the difference between a top 10, a top 100, or a top 500 player.